Okay, so this next section is also a very important section. We've heard some pretty hardcore science throughout this, but we are also, I think, a very well rounded team that we're very serious about having this work be referable to the needs of the community, to patients and their families. And as we mentioned before, our patient advocates are playing an absolutely central role in everything that we do. They're integrated into all of the work packages. They're integrated into the management group. They're leading efforts, and we're listening and following their lead. And so we think this is an important part of the opportunity while we're all assembled here together to learn more about those interactions. And we're, I think, really grateful today to have a fireside discussion with Dave Chuter and Mariam Jamal-Hanjani. So just by ways of introduction. So Dave Chuter is one of our lead patient advocates, and Dave has really stepped up. Dave's an esophageal cancer survivor, a very inspiring person, a very wise person, a very kind person, who helps us understand the needs of the community. I remember when we were going through the process and we were going through the interviews, and when the patient advocate group was interviewing us and you spoke, I could see the response. Like they all totally got what we were trying to do. You were able to help everybody understand that. And so we need to learn from you, Dave, and to continue to learn from you. And Mariam Jamal-Hanjani is the consummate physician scientist who really bridges the most fundamental science and patients. So I'm really glad that you're here to lead this fireside chat, you and Dave together. Thank you both.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. This is going to be very much so off the cuff, so an informal discussion, Paul said. And I guess I would just preface it with, I've worked with patient advocates for over a decade now, and in particular an organisation which Dave is involved in. And over recent years, Dave and I became more familiar with each other over studies like TraceRx and the autopsy programme, and some of the work we'd like to do in the future, and really the Cancer Grand challenges. And so I'm going to start with a question.
Go on then.
Aimed at you, Dave. Why do you think the patient perspective is really important in cancer research, and then maybe in particular in Team eDyNAmiC?
Right. Why? The research, cancer research is all about the patient. You're looking at how you're going to help cure or treat the patients in the best way. The patient has to have needs to have a voice in that research. It's somebody once said to me, it was a patient advocate, nothing about me without me. And that is so true of cancer research. It's making sure that the research understands the need of the patient. There's a lot of things that it's hard for us to understand the science, but we have that lived experience which can help you understand what the patient needs, how they're going to be treated, and what that treatment means will affect that patient and what it means to that patient. And with Team eDyNAmiC, it's a huge multi-international collaboration of researchers. We got PPI from the UK, I'm from the UK, we've got David from the US, and we've got Johanna from Germany. And we're looking to build on that to make sure we got the patients from across the world working with us, not as somebody who's just a tag on a tick box, but as somebody who's actually having a say, having a look at it, understanding what's going on, and explaining to the public, to the world, the other patients, what's going on in an easy way.
Yeah. Okay. So not only thinking about the needs of the patient, how we communicate to the public also, and one step closer to the public is the patient themselves,
Yes,
right? And the scientist or the academic clinician is a little bit more far removed. So you can help us also bridge that gap.
Yes, it's bridging the gap between the researchers, the scientists, and the public.
Yeah.
It's the public, and everybody becomes a patient at some time. A member of the public, it's totally different, might have a totally different view and might not understand what the science is about on why they're doing it.
Mm.
But once you become a patient, and once you know that that treatment, that research has helped cure you, it changes it completely.
And so speaking about how we communicate and how we reach out to communities and the public, and I think I certainly could do this. I'd need to work on it, and perhaps others as well. But what makes for a good, how do scientists or cancer researchers, let's say, communicate effectively with the patient advocates? Forget the clinicians who perhaps have to do it as part of their vocation.
Yep.
But what are the obstacles? What have you, in your experience, seen done poorly? And do you have any advice for us?
See, anything done poorly, it's some researchers, some scientists, they don't, because they're not in clinic, they don't see a patient. They don't understand that the patient is a person. It's either a number or a biopsy in the lab.
A recruitment to a study?
A recruitment to a study,
yeah.
it's a number, it's not a name. So we're kind of forgotten as people, as persons.
That sounds terrible, Dave.
It does.
Yeah, okay.
But that is why, one of the things I always wanted to do, and I've done it before in other labs, I've gone around the labs, talked to the scientists, talked to the researchers, let them know that we are people out there. We have needs of knowing what's going on, and we have needs as a patient to be known as a patient, as a person, not just a number.
And so over the next day or two, thanks to Paul and Pema, you will be visiting labs
I will
here.
be, yeah.
And what will you be looking out for? Is it will you sort of in the most friendliest of ways try to communicate that sort of to the scientists?
Yes. The first thing is to say, hello, I'm a patient. Many don't see that. Many don't talk to a patient. So it's just that initial communication, be able to talk, explain what's happened to me, explain how research has got me to where I am now.
Yes.
I wouldn't have survived without the research that's going on with my cancer. It's one of those cancers which is very rare, but it's also one of the deadliest. So it's just letting people know that I'm a person.
You mentioned tick box
Yes.
earlier, and increasingly funding bodies, I'm not naming any, but in the main, most are asking for involvement with public engagement, patient advocacy. And how do you think, for want of a better word, we might normalize integrating patient advocacy into the research that we do? We know that it's mandated, depending on the funding body and so on. But what do you think is needed for it to become almost implicit in cancer research?
It's me. I do sit on a couple of funding panels, and it's making sure that when we're in those interviews or at those panels, we're included in everything. We have the same time to ask the questions on the PPI as the scientists had to ask about the research. There's been one or two, not recently, but a few years ago, where every interviewer had 10 minutes. The PPI had 2 minutes and could only ask 2 questions. It's changed now, which is good. So we get an equal say, equal time, and we see ourselves as equal partners in that funding panel, and that's what is needed. And it's making sure that we are included in everything. We see all the papers. I do read all the papers. I don't always understand it all, but
that means we're not doing a good job as we should.
No. What happens is I read the lay summary first, then I skim read the whole thing to find out what's missing from the lay summary, and that's what I feel is my role, is to make sure that the information you want to put over is in that lay summary, and so it works that way.
Okay, and I guess for Team eDyNAmiC, perhaps tell us a bit about your experience so far, and has it been hard work? Has it been? Have you already seen progress?
I've seen progress, yes.
Okay.
It is hard work. To me, to understand a lot of the science, a lot of the research is, I'm not ever going to understand that. But there's little bits and pieces I can see, and I can say, well, I can see the hope in there for patients, and that's one of the big things with this team, with this research is the hope we're giving other patients and we're putting across. It's there's going to be little things I see and I want to pick up on, and I will speak to you, Paul, Palmer, and just say, you know, have you considered this? Would this help?
Mm.
It's not. I'll never be a scientist. I'll never be a scientist, but I will be somebody who can represent other patients, put their voice to it. And I run support groups, so I get their views as well. It's not just my views that come to the table. I have the views of all the other patients I give support to, our support network. So.
And so as researchers, we need to, at the very least, meet our patient advocates halfway. We need to learn from you. We need to be guided from you. What is it that you think we could do better? Do you think we need to try harder to convey our science in a way that's more layman friendly? Do you think we need to, what would you tell us?
It is making sure that you put out what you're doing in an easy, plain language summary for patients to understand.
Do you think that's hard for us in particular with
I
something
do.
as somewhat ethereal as ecDNA?
It is. It's very difficult for you, and as a patient advocate, I look to see that there's no scientific terms in there, and if there is, I need to explaining. You know, come back to you and say, what does that actually mean?
Because do you think that could be the first barrier that distances us from our patients? And
It's just a language barrier. And might be all English, but there is a difference between the plain English for the public and the patients and scientific English. So there is that barrier of language.
I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to see if you'd like to ask us anything, me. And what do you at the summit in Washington? We learned from some of the past patient advocates and current patient advocates. I really like that there was an emphasis on think prospectively upfront, early on in the grand challenges. What is the measure of success from a patient's perspective, not just scientifically, but how can the science and the research and the progress benefit our patients? We talk, you know, it's sometimes a throwaway saying that we want our future patients to benefit, future generations of patients, but actually, what kind of legwork do we need to put in? What do you think is successful science? And we're right at the beginning of this journey. What would be your measures? You know, you might turn around and say something as, you know, new drugs, or what do you think within reason to you says this is a good metric, a good measure of successful team eDyNAmiC?
I think for me, the most successful thing would be what I'd like to see. Cancer is evolving constantly. DNA is changing all the time. There's mutations we don't know about yet coming along. But this is making sure that we always on top of the game. We understand what's going on now, and we can hopefully predict in the future what's going on. That's going to benefit patients. The success has got to be it benefits patients. Simple as that.
Yes.
It's nothing else other than we help cure a patient. We help treat a patient safely.
Yeah. No frills. Nothing fancy.
Nothing fancy.
Yeah.
Just making sure the patient is at the forefront. We're doing this for the patients.
Dave, you just did the two parts. You said at the end of it, the goal has to be something that's going to benefit patients, and patients are incredibly patient, and you know, they might appreciate that something might take, you know, from discovery to clinical trial, it could be decades, but just that it's moving. And you said right at the beginning the same thing that every scientist and cancer researcher in this room would agree with. You actually described the thrill and excitement of discovery and prediction. You know, we find new things, get on top of the game, be able to predict things. You basically said from a patient's perspective what every scientist here is driven by.
I hope I did. But it is a patient is always going to look. You know, I know if I go into research now, if I'm not well, I go into a research trial, it's not going to benefit me. It's going to benefit my daughters, my grandkids, my family. You know, it's going to benefit other people rather than
myself. There's that real altruism that we didn't think we'd see in the research autopsy studies, that patients they have been the #1 advocate to donate their bodies to research that they will never benefit from, obviously, because, you know, it's their body and it's after death, but that they're willing to do that for future patients.
It's strange, isn't it? It's a member of the public who's not been ill might not even consider research in any way and get involved other than donate money to a charity. But when you're a patient and you see how that research has actually saved your life, treated you well, and you know that it's all changing. We need to move on. We need to find out what's around the corner. So that's why I get involved with that kind of thing, that research.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, sorry, I'm stopping. No more questions from me. Yes, please.
Let's turn it around. What does research, what does scientists, what do clinicians, what do the researchers get from us?
Do you know, I think I'm a little bit biased because I'm also a medic. I qualified for med school over 20 years ago, and I treat patients with a diagnosis of lung cancer. And aside from the qualities that you need for that, empathy, patience, etc., and so on, I think I should be well placed to understand the patient's perspective. But I don't think I always am. And I think it might be pressures of work, it might be things that you want to achieve, it could be timelines, etc. And if then you are a clinician that also has to deliver in the world of research, I think that can be even more intense. So I really want to constantly be reminded of the patient's perspective. And I said yesterday, and I think we've really inculcated this from day one of Team eDyNAmiC, the patient has to be at the heart of the research we do. Because it's so easy to be completely, spiral into the beauty of the science of it and the research, let alone some of the other things that we have to deliver on with the publications, and you're only as good as your last grant and so on. But really, what is the humane drive that makes you want to come to work every day? I think that's really helpful from our patient advocates. And I would really like to be challenged, even if it's the same question and it's repetitive. How's this going to benefit patients? How are you going to turn this into something that's translational? What does this actually mean for a patient? So I think I want that as a researcher, to be constantly reminded of why we do the work that we do, because we can get lost a little as a result of those pressures and needing to deliver. Those endpoints seem to be the only thing on our minds, but the picture is bigger than that.
It is. Do you see what the patient advocates get something which can't be taught in medical school and research?
We don't get taught it.
Right.
We don't.
Okay.
I think research has helped us understand the importance of patient advocacy, even to the medics who deal with patients day in, day out. I think patient advocacy is slightly different to having to treat the patients who's sitting in front of you. How do you advocate for your patient? How do you act as an advocate? If you don't, then you need another patient to do it for other patients in the patient community, because they are the most well-versed to do that. So I think it's good that we have it on, someone that's not us that's trying to remind us, and we need that perspective.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, and I also think I really sometimes need advice about how better to communicate the science that can be complicated. I think Team eDyNAmiC, we started thinking about this. How do we communicate what ecDNA is? We almost need a toolbox, a toolkit, the terminology. If I think I can only reflect on the research I've been involved in with peace, we talked about in the early days, it was really difficult to have that conversation about death and the stigma of it. And now it's become more commonplace to say, can I have a biopsy of your tissue? It's for research. Don't know if you'll benefit, but scientists might, and I think the terminology is really important. We say layman-friendly terms. And sharing, what you think sounds acceptable to you.
Yeah, and I think that patient advocacy has helped that happen.
Yes.
Because it's people who understand the research and want to get involved in research will make sure that other patients want to be involved as well.
Yes.
Well, one of the biggest things with my support groups is getting a research team to come and talk to them about the research. And it's amazing how many people hadn't even thought of getting involved with research, even though they've been on a research trial during their treatment. And they don't realize it's open to them. It's something that's was a kind of a closed door. They had to shout. It's only if you're really passionate about it that you get involved. But now it's starting to open up, and it's a lot of people coming along.
So we need to be more open with our science as well.
More open with science. Talk to patient organisations, patient charities. Talk to support groups.
Yeah, Dave, do you think I won't speak on behalf of others, but do you think researchers might sometimes come across as underestimating what the patient can understand about the science, or, could we possibly be in any way patronizing? Could we make assumptions that are unreasonable?
Yeah, it does happen. It does happen. And I can understand that, because you've gone through a lot of education to get to where you are, but you haven't always been able to talk to a patient at any stage. One of the things I do like is going around wards, labs, and talking to the researchers in those labs. And it's one of those things where it's just making that link, putting that link over between the two, and helping break down the barrier.
Yeah,
bring down the barrier.
We're very familiar with the term bench to bedside, but a scientist to patient. It means to just find that
it's totally different.
Very different.
So Dave and Mariam, thank you so much for that. That discussion is so important. Dave, I want to ask you, what is the most difficult aspect of your job as a patient advocate? Can you share that with us, and what do you think could make it better?
Most important thing for me is understanding I'm just trying to understand the basics of the science that's coming through, and then trying to put it into a summary I can give to another patient so they can understand. We're looking to recruit new patient advocates within the group, within the team. So it's making sure that I can put that down so they can understand it and they want to get involved. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Dave. Thank you for your time yesterday, and wonderful time about dinner. And we learned yesterday that you were under a lot of stress regarding not only cancer and cancer treatment, but medical appointment and insurance and everything. So we can get many tips and inspiration from you guys. I mean, patient and survivors. But what do you want from research and team like eDyNAmiC? I mean, what do you think we should do for patients and survivors? I mean, what can encourage you?
What encourages you, Dave?
What
can we do in Team eDyNAmiC that motivates and encourages you, and that's given the pressures of being a patient advocate? I think, is that what you were?
Yeah. What encourages me is being seen as an equal partner within the team. It's being involved with everything that goes on. I sit on the management team, and I can see what everything's going on. It's so transparent to the patients, and I can transfer that back to other patients. And it's being so open and transparent to the world, to the patients of the world.
And I think the other thing that Paul was alluding to, Dave's involvement, not only at the level of management, but how we interact between work packages and different investigators. He actually gave us, I talked about a toolkit. He told us ways in which we can improve how we outreach to community, how we might want to consider how we communicate our science, training the next generation of patient advocates. Because, sometimes it feels like they're gold dust. It's hard to find patient advocates who perhaps have the training or the skills to be able to integrate and be part of scientific research. So he's really taught us with ideas as to how we can implement, actively engage with patient advocacy.
With new patient advocates coming along, they're going to be more relevant now than ever before, because the treatment, the research, what they've gone through is totally different to what happened to me 16 years ago. It's going to be new, and the things I know now from my experience are not always relevant to what the new patient's going through. So we need those new PPI, those patient advocates, to come along, and I can help them get involved, but it's up to them to actually learn and understand what's going on.
So we draw heavily on Dave, right? I mean, I don't know how many times a week we talk, but it's a lot, right? We are drawing very heavily on Dave. And I just want to share another experience that I think sets the tone for this kind of an interaction. So, when we started, I certainly hadn't had any experience with engaging and involving our patient advocates. We knew that this was important, but we started having our meetings and we watched what happened. And you, Dave, and David Aarons were particularly key to this. We watched how the meetings changed, which was at first, it was Pema and I putting forth concepts and agendas and asking, how do you want to be involved, right? And then within 3 meetings, we were just in the back listening because you and David and Johanna had really moved to the forefront of this, right? And we were taking our cues from you and will continue to take our cues from you. One thing that I think would be great is if you could expound a little bit about where we're going from the patient advocacy side, give just a little bit of a preview of coming attractions to the kinds of things that we're thinking about.
Where we're going, good grief, Paul. It's the science in this is so huge, it's so broad, it's so spread across so many different areas, work packages. It's going to make a huge difference to patients across the world, not just in America, not just in the UK, Europe, but across the world in all we do. And that's one of the big things for
Dave,
me.
You've got ambitions in Team eDyNAmiC because you've almost come up with a timeline, milestones. You've been really passionate about training the next generation of patient advocates, but bringing new patient advocates in. You've been really passionate about how we might be public facing, how we communicate, whether it's website design, whether it's patient information sheets. We've talked about newsletters. These are all ideas that you and David Aarons have had and Johanna, and you're being kind to us. We can't do it all in year 1, but you've really thought about how at the end of 5 years, we hopefully would have achieved something that means patient advocacy drove the science and itself moved forward.
Yep, my dream would be to make this team be the model for all future grand challenges, for all future patient advocacy across the world, to push it forward that we are here as an equal partner and that we have a voice, and research is actually hearing us, Paul. And Mariam, it's one of the things which I wouldn't have thought would happen 10 years ago, but it's changing so much now. And it's so good to see it happening. And it is important for the patient to be that involved because research is like an avocado. Right at the center, you've got the stone, which is the patients. They're always going to be there. And the science, the research is all around the outside and it grows. It comes to a stage when that science is outdated. You plant that avocado stone and it starts all over again. It's a kind of thing, the patient's always going to be there right at the center, and research is all the way around it.
May I ask one thing, Paul? Just you mentioned about hope. Where is the hope? And you're right, Dave said that to us very early on. And then at another meeting, you said, we're a bit anxious. We're worried because we know ecDNA is bad.
Yeah.
We know that if patients got ecDNA, it's a predictor for poor outcome. And we've seen that over and over again. And how do you break that news and not lose hope? And we're scared. I think even as researchers, we're not quite sure how to strike that fine balance because we need time. So whilst you want to be honest with your patient, and of course it's not in the clinic, we're not doing this right now.
Yep.
But we want to move towards being able to use that as a way to stratify how we treat and manage our patients. But we've got to really strike the right balance in making sure that hope still stays because we're hopeful, we're doing the work.
Yep.
And it won't all come at once. So it may be breaking bad news, but with the encouragement that something's going to come along. That's tricky, don't you think?
It's just very tricky. It's making sure that you give the hope. It's not always going to be the patient you're seeing, you're talking to. It's going to be somebody else along the line, their family.
Yeah, and that's just life, isn't it?
That's just life.
That's tough for us to accept, but
it's tough. It's tough for a patient to accept, and it's one of those things we do accept it as a patient. We know we're ill. We've heard a diagnosis. We know what's going to happen, but we always see in research that little bit of hope that although it might not help me, it's going to help somebody else down the line.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi. As I want to follow up with the hope direction. And as a researcher, especially someone who is interested in technology development and also molecular mechanism, I don't have much involvement with patients directly, but I really hope that my research can benefit the patients. On the other hand, I feel like research can go very slow, and the discovery that we made maybe just a step by step. So how do we deliver the hope while keep our research accuracy?
How do you deliver hope knowing that actually it's, you know, a long game, and that where she works in sort of machine or technology development and so on, that's really a stepwise process.
Yeah, that is a hard question. It's the hope has got to be, I don't know, it's got to be right at the top, right at the forefront of what you're doing, making sure that what you're doing, you're looking for that hope for that patient. You're doing the work to give that hope, and it's understanding how it's going to be. I don't know. It's how do you put it to a patient? How do you put it?
Tricky, isn't it?
It is very tricky.
I'm working on something that I think at some point will deliver and will make a change.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. That's what's driving me and motivating me, and that's, yeah, maybe it's a little bit difficult. I think
it's a little bit difficult. But it's one of those things. Research, whatever the outcome, good or bad, a good result, a bad result, it doesn't work, doesn't matter. You've got an answer.
And you're being honest.
And you're being honest and transparent. And it's research that don't give you the answers is still very good research, because somebody else is not going to go down that route and waste their time looking at it. It's going to give the answers to something. Whether or not you're going to use it's going to be used or not, you've got an answer. You know that doesn't work. Let's look at something else, another way. So it's a continuous cycle of ensuring that what research goes around. Research looks at what is needed, and if it's got to a stage where you don't think that is needed, that's fine. You now know you have to look elsewhere, which is good. That is the hope.